Welcome to this multi-part tutorial series where we will go over on some more advanced techniques on how to use anchor points in your project. This series is a follow-up of our basic anchor point series, which you can find on our channel. In this video we will go over on how to create this very nice ladder effect that you can see over here. We will place special focus on how to create some small roughness variation, how to add some extra folds along with the color in these folds, and also how to add some basic edge highlights, dirt, and some other generic highlights as you can see over here, all with the use of anchor points. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So, what are anchor points? Anchor points are a powerful feature that let you reuse a part of your layer stack. This means that you can define a mask or layer once and reference it dynamically in other layers. If you change the anchor point, all references are updated as well, letting you work smarter and faster. So let's get started. So what I have here is our base shoe, and it just has a simple base leather material that is placed into a folder that has a color selection mask, which will basically just control wherever we want to have our leather. Now what we're going to do is we are first going to get started by just improving the look of our leather a little bit, because right now it does not look very good. So let's go ahead and let's start by adding some roughness variation. However, this roughness variation will also double as our base anchor point. So let's get started and add a fill layer over here and just call this like leather roughness base over here. And all we really need to do is we just need to go ahead and we need to grab only our roughness over here. And let's give it, like a bit of a shine. So let's have a look. Yeah, I quite like this. Let's do around 0.45. That seems like quite a nice shine. Or maybe like 0.4. There we go. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a mask. A simple black mask. And then we want to add a ambient occlusion generator, which will basically make sure that the roughness looks a little bit duller around our occlusion areas. So if we go in here, we can go ahead and add a generator over here. And then you can simply go ahead and grab the ambient occlusion generator like this. And with this one here, you can see like it's a little bit duller. It's not perfect yet, so let's go ahead and just improve it. The first thing that you will always notice, although it might be a little bit difficult to see here, maybe if I add my color. Yeah, here, see if I add the base color, you can see it. Ambient occlusions, they always are a little bit dotty. I don't know how to say it, like noisy, like you can see like these small dots here. So let's go ahead and improve that by simply going in here, adding a filter and adding a blur to this filter. And then you can see that often here gives us like a slightly nicer transition. And then what I want to do is I'm just going to add an extra levels on top to basically remove most of my occlusion around these areas to make it look a little bit duller wherever we have our occlusion. So let's go ahead and add the levels. And like push the black slider of this levels down a little bit. Here we go. It might look very dramatic, but don't forget that as soon as we turn off our color, here see that looks quite nice because you do not get the roughness around these areas. Also, one thing to keep in mind that is once again easier if I visualize with your color, is that right now we have our laces over here that are also being included, which is not very nice. For this, what you can of course do is you can always go down here and add a custom paint layer so that you can do some custom painting. For example, if we go to our brush and grab a basic soft brush, simply press X to flip to a black color and then, press X to flip to a white color and then you can go ahead and you can paint out this laces occlusion that you can see over here. If you want to go ahead and ignore the laces during the painting, you can always click on this little box here and turn off your laces. When you do that, it will simply ignore those and it makes it easier for you to paint around. So that's just something I wanted to show you over here. The reason that I'm showing you now is because we are going to add an anchor point and you always need to do this before you add your anchor point. So now what we can do is we can just go ahead and turn off the color and then we can go back into our mask and start by adding our anchor point. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave the name the same so that I can easily reference it later on because we will be referencing this quite a bit. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and add some extra letter details, like some edge highlights, some dirt, and just general details like that. For this, what I like to do is I like to create a new folder just to keep things nice and organized. And just go ahead and call this letter details over here. And once we've done that, what we can do is we can get started with some edge highlights. For this, we just want to go ahead and grab a simple fill layer and just call this edge highlights over here. And then in this fill layer, what we want to do is just go ahead and turn everything off except for once again our roughness and our color. Now these highlights are quite easy. All we need to do is just add a simple black mask. And then if we go to our smart generators over here, we can go ahead and, smart masks of course. We can go ahead and just find something that we like. Let's see, for example, let's say edge is dusty over here. As you can see here, it gives us like a nice dusty effect. And you can always go ahead and just play around with your balance to make it stronger or less strong. Next, I want to go back into the fill layer and I'm just going to go to my base color. And I'm just going to go ahead and play with my base color. If you want, you can also use a color picker to get started. And let's just make this like a little bit darker. So they are edge highlights, but they are not as much highlighted as being like just some darkening over here. So I should have called it edge darkening. Now I would say that maybe like tone down my roughness a little bit more so that it looks a little bit duller. And we can also go ahead and go back into our mask editor and maybe like push it up a little bit more like this. There we go. So that will just already like give us some darkening, which gives us like a nice dirty look. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some general dirt. This is always a good one to add. Let's add a fill layer and just call this dirt. Very easy. And we are once again gonna go for our roughness and set this to be quite dull. I always like to make my dirt quite dull. As for the color, I'm already going to like set it to be like a brownish color, but we will always just go back in and just balance it out. And then add a simple black mask. At this point, I want to get started by referencing our leather roughness base because we can use this ambient occlusion to improve our dirt so that we have dirt specifically around our ambient occlusion areas. To do this, we can just go ahead and add a fill. Go to our grayscale, anchor points and add our leather roughness base over here. You can already see it happening a little bit. Next, we are simply going to press this little invert button over here. And that will give us control a little bit more over like where our dirt is. Now you can of course also play around a little bit more with your levels to increase or decrease it. But I'm not going to play around with it too much. Now this does not look very good. So what we're going to do now is we are gonna go ahead and add a generator on top of this. And this generator, if we just go ahead and grab a simple dirt generator like this, you can see that it already has like this extra dirt. Now I don't want to have this dirt everywhere. So as soon as I set my dirt generator to multiply, it will combine with my ambient occlusion to basically make my ambient occlusion almost like a dirt effect. Almost like a nice dirt look over here. So what I mean is it will specifically add this dirt to our ambient occlusion so that it does not look so smooth anymore. Now at this point you can play around a little bit more with your levels if you want to increase or decrease the dirt. And one thing that I do notice, once again, is that over here you can see that everything looks very noisy. So let's go ahead and add an extra filter on top with a blur. And just give it like a slight blur over here. It is no problem in this case because often with leather, it is not like a very specific dirt, but it's like a faded dirt. At this point we can just go ahead and we can play around with our base color to make it more or less strong. Just play around and get whatever you want. Like a base color like this looks quite nice. And I do like that my roughness is looking quite dull. And you can see that we already are adding a little bit more texture to our shoe over here. So now that we've done this, I want to go ahead and add some more highlights. But these are going to be like overall highlights. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add another fill layer. Call it overall highlights over here. And let's go ahead and make the roughness to be probably like a little bit shiny still. And for our base color, just set it to full white. So this is almost going to be like the white fade that you often see on leather. Then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add once again a simple black mask. But this time we are going to reference once again our leather roughness base anchor point. So let's go ahead and let's add a simple fill over here. Reference our leather. And what I want to do is I want to play around a little bit more with my levels over here to make this look quite strong. If you get this effect, which might not look very nice, although it will most likely not be that noticeable, you can always go in and just paint a little bit more over here, see? Just to blend it in a little bit better or make your brush a bit smoother. But I will show you like a way that we can easily like just remove this ugly looking spot over here. The way that we are going to do that is we now have our fill over here, that's totally fine. I now want to go ahead and I want to add another fill, but this fill will have a grunge map. So we can go into our textures and we can go down and just grab something that you think looks nice. So I'm gonna go, because we have a lot of like smudgy looking grunge maps over here, which I think feel like quite fitting for leather. So let's for example grab our grunge wipe smudgy soft over here. And then what you want to do is you just want to go ahead and first of all set the blending mode to multiply and set the scale to maybe like, I don't know, is 10 too much? No, 10 looks about fine. And then you can also go ahead and you can play around a little bit more with like your balance. And finally, in general, I would say just go ahead and tone everything in your overall highlights down. So we got this one. Let's see if we can maybe like push around these areas a little bit more like this. And let's see if I can make my smudgy effect maybe with my contrast like a little bit stronger. Just trying to get like a nice look. Something like this looks quite nice. So you can see that it is really only around these areas over here. Sometimes you might get a seam like you can see over here. If you have this, simply set your projection from UV projection to triplanar projection. You might need to then go ahead and like play around a little bit more with your scale because it has become a bit smaller. But the triplanar will not look at your UVs, so it will just properly project even if you have seams. So now at this point, click on your overall highlights. Go down here into the opacity and just tone this way down to something like, let's do something like around 10, I think. Seems fine. Or maybe like 15. Here, see? And then we can also go ahead and we can play around a little bit more with our roughness just to see whatever looks best. Okay, perfect. So now we have quite a nice base leather. Now what we are going to do is we are just going to go ahead and add some extra creases just to make the leather feel a little bit more worn out. So for our creases and folds, let's go ahead and use this area as like an example. What we are going to do is we are going to get started by creating the height part of it. And then later on we will also add some extra colors and also even some extra dirt to our creases and folds. So I'm going to get started by adding a fill layer. And just go ahead and call this folds underscore height, for example. And all you really need to do is only turn on the height map. Now you can already give the height map like a little indent, but what you will always see happening is that it will break our model. And the reason for this is because we currently have tessellation turned on, so it will be in actual height. So what I want to do is I'm just going to add a black mask. And then on top of this black mask, I want to already paint in just a shape. So let's grab a basic soft brush and let's say that I want to paint in my creases and folds around these areas. This will look very bad in the beginning, but don't worry. So let's say that I just have them here and it is just like a quick example of where I want to have them. The first thing we need to do is we need to improve our outline over here and have it like really nicely fading into the rest of the shoe. The way that we can do this is by adding a filter along with a blur and just making the blur quite strong like you can see over here. See? That will give us like a really nice transition for what we are going to do next, which is adding our actual creases. So to do that, all we need to do is we need to add a simple fill. And then in our grayscale, we want to go ahead and want to select a creases texture. So let's go into textures. Let's type in creases. And let's grab our creases soft over here. This one will do the trick just fine. So you want to go ahead and drag it in here. And then what we need to do is let's first of all set the scaling to something like 10. And then finally, right now the direction is all over the place. Like these ones are going sideways, these ones are going up. I don't like that. So I'm gonna go into my projection and set my projection from UV projection to triplanar. Once I've done that, you can go ahead and you can play around a little bit more with your scale. Let's say that I'm going to set it to like 7 or maybe like 8. And of course, what you can do is if you press E, you can also play around with your rotation thanks to the triplanar. So we can give it like a little rotation to go along with our shoe. If your shoe, just think about the storytelling, how your shoe is often walking around and where the creases will happen. They will often happen around these joints and around the front over here. So now that we have done this, we want to go ahead and we want to make sure that it only shows up wherever we have painted our mask. We can simply do this by setting this from normal to multiply. And now you can see that the creases only show up wherever I have painted my mask. And I can now also go in here and I can simply grab my basic soft and I can easily just paint in more or less creases wherever I want, just like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly off camera paint in my creases in some nice areas and then we will just go ahead and continue. Okay, so here we go. Now if you feel like your creases are looking a little bit too strong, you can always go into your creases soft and just tone down the opacity a little bit like this. So now finally what we need to do is we need to add a simple anchor point on top of this so that we can reference these creases into our dirt and also into some general color. And that is what I want to do next. I want to go ahead and just give our creases or our folds a little bit of like a color so that we can see it a bit better. So let's go ahead and add another fill layer. And let's just call this folds underscore color. And then we can just go ahead and add a simple black mask. And now what we want to do is we want to probably use a nice mask generator for this. So let's go into our smart masks over here. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to find like a nice little generator that really improves our curvature. Let's for example go for like a dust occlusion over here. That one often seems to work fine. And then if we go ahead and go into our generator, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to reference once again our folds anchor point over here. Once this is not the ladder roughness anchor point, but our actual folds. So if you go in here, you want to scroll down to your micro height. And then you want to go to anchor points and grab your folds height. Once we've done that, we do need to turn this on. So let's go into our micro details and turn on our micro height. And now you will see it working. Now I actually want to go ahead and right now it is generating on top of the creases. So I want to go down and I want to invert my micro height so that it is generating the dirt inside of my creases like this. So here you can see that we can like add some general dirt. You can of course play around with like your AO depth to increase or decrease everything. Sometimes your AO radius also gives you like a nice effect. But this is looking pretty much fine to me. Now what I want to do is I want to go back and I want to make my color to be almost like a dark reddish color. This is what you often see in like leather, like a dark red color. Let's turn off everything else except for maybe also our roughness. Let's give it some roughness. That is a little bit duller. And then simply go back into your dirt and here you can go ahead and you can play around with your intensity to get like the effects that you want. So I don't want to have this too strong. So I'm just going to go ahead and play around a little bit more with like my intensity. Here we go. Like this. And you can always go into your dirt and you can always like use your opacity to also increase or decrease this. Something like this. It's just like a nice subtle effect as you can see over here. Now finally to finish things off, what I want to do is I just want to also include my dirt in these creases and folds. So if we go back into our ladder details, we can go into our dirt. And let's go ahead and just add a new fill. But of course what you want to do is you want to go ahead and just drag this fill below all of our dirt generators and our blur. Now in this fill all I need to do is I need to reference my folds with our anchor point. And then go ahead and set the mode from normal to add, so that it will also add this dirt on top of it. And you can always here, see, you can kind of like play around a little bit more with your... Here, see, it's very subtle, but it is there, and that's the point of it. So you can play around a little bit more with your levels if you want. But in general, once you've played around with all of that, you have this very nice and flexible leather material that you can also use anywhere else. And all you really need to change is you would need to change where you want to paint in your folds, whenever you use it on a different material, and maybe paint in or out some ambient occlusion. So that was about it for this tutorial. I hope that you liked it, and I hope to see you next time.